Today, we're going to be looking at a lesson which is a little bit longer than our usual lesson because there's a lot of background that we're really going to need to understand about how feudalism comes to Great Britain or how it comes to the British Isles. So today's lesson is lesson 1-2.10, Normans, run! So before we get into this rich history of the Normans, it's worth noting that the Normans have a very complex and rich history. They could rightfully have a subunit in this class all to themselves. They are as influential in many ways as Charlemagne and the Carolingian Empire were. I mean, these guys are very important. But the reality is, we're going to try to get through them in just a couple of days to talk about their overall influence in Europe. So it will be kind of jam-packed. So the Normans, who were they? They begin as this collection of skilled raiders that start attacking mainland Europe in the 800s. That's not really how they begin, but that's where our story of them is going to begin. Throughout the Middle Ages, their power, their influence will expand, and they really do get to a point where they are in control of substantial portions of Europe. And where they're not in control, they are influencing, and everybody knows of the Normans and fears the Normans. The name Normans itself derives from Norsemen, or men of the North. These were the descendants of Vikings. Vikings you've probably heard about before. They come from Scandinavia, or modern Norway, Sweden, Denmark. And they really start hitting Europe hard in the 700s AD, but really more into the 800s, 900s AD, where these Norsemen are just flooding out of Scandinavia. And you might wake up one day and you've got this horde of guys rushing toward your village because they were expert navigators. They sailed on boats that could travel both in the open ocean and in rivers, so they really could strike inland places like Paris easily, and therefore were very feared. Now, the Viking invasions really start impacting our region of the world, that is the focus of our lessons, in the early 800s. This is where they start to strike out again from Norway and Sweden, Denmark, and they first start hitting England. They're raiding these communities and they're collecting the wealth that they see there. And it's not extravagant. They're hitting a few monasteries, a few abbeys, and hauling away some religious wealth. Not a whole lot, but definitely enough to whet their appetite. And pretty soon, our Norsemen are not just attacking the British Isles, but they're attacking the West Frankish Kingdom, East Frankish Kingdom, down into Spain. They're harassing Muslim-controlled Spain and North Africa. They wind up in Italy. A little bit later on, they even try a raid on Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. So they are really everywhere. And everybody's aware of the Vikings. Everybody fears the Norsemen. Now, the Norsemen begin as raiders. But after a while, they start to look at some of the areas that they're raiding and realize that these are really nice areas. They wouldn't mind living here. France, northern France, and England were a couple of these areas in particular. After raiding northern France and England, the Norsemen look around and say, hey, wouldn't be so bad to live here. And hey, these guys who live here now, we're pushing them around pretty easily. So why don't we just set up shop? And pretty soon we see that happening in northern France by the early 900s. And after a generation or so of fighting, the French king makes a deal with these Norse. And in exchange for the Norse accepting feudal vassalage under the King of France, they can keep everything that they've conquered. They will call it Normandy after the Normans, and the leader of the Normans will become a duke within the feudal system. That is a very high lord within that feudal system. Nobody has to fight anymore. The king has a vassal. Turns out this vassal is not going to be the best vassal to have, and we'll get into that later. But for a while, this works out, stops the fighting, and the Norsemen have a home in France. Now, in addition, they wind up having a home in England, although this English home was never quite as accommodating. Norse raids into England almost result in a complete takeover. This map really shows all the purple areas is where the Norsemen are in firm control. They're also raiding deep into this territory of Wessex and also this of Northumbria. These tan colors are a group called the Anglo-Saxons that we're going to talk about in a moment. The blue are lands of the Britons, the people who were here long time ago. So the Norse arrive in the midst of the conflict between the Anglo-Saxons and the Britons for control of the island. And they've been fighting for hundreds of years, really ever since the Romans left. The Anglo-Saxons have come in and tried to take it over. And just as the Anglo-Saxons are starting to look like this island is now going to be theirs, they've really beaten the Britons are on the run, that is when the Vikings show up. That is when the Norsemen arrive. A little bit about the Anglo-Saxons, because we're going to talk about them more as well. They arrive in Britain just as the Roman Empire is collapsing. The Angles and the Saxons are two tribes, and they both are a part of this rush of barbarian invasions that destroys the Roman Empire. They come over, they take over huge parts of England. They never establish a feudal system. Instead, they wind up having kings that just have direct rule over small kingdoms. Unity was very rare. There were a few times where the Anglo-Saxons more or less united, but those were short-lived. And usually these kings would then find themselves at war with each other again shortly down the way. Wessex is going to be a big one to pay attention to. That's one of the major kingdoms that's going to be important to our story in a couple slides. In this slide even. So we've reached the part in our story where we're going to talk about King Harold. King Harold was an Anglo-Saxon king. He was born in Wessex, and he is going to be the king that is faced with this Norse army. The invading Norse had defeated most of these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Really only two were left, Wessex and Northumbria. Northumbria was pretty beat up. So Wessex is pretty much standing alone against this massive Viking force, as these Norse had defeated the other kingdoms. Now in 1066, the unconquered Anglo-Saxons select this new king, King Harold. He takes over after the death of the previous king. And it was kind of a controversy over whether or not King Harold should be king. There was another guy who was also in line. But Harold gets the nod. He becomes king, and he pulls together what forces he can. He marches against Harold Hardrada. I know it's confusing, same name. This is the Viking leader, the Norse leader. And we have a massive battle between Harold Godwinson, our Wessex guy, and the Vikings. He's outnumbered, yet manages to win this battle, defeats the main Norse army in England, and scatters the Norse. So the Anglo-Saxons have finally defeated the Norse and chased them from England. Good for the Anglo-Saxons, right? Well, here's that other guy. The other guy who claimed to have part of the right to the English crown was William, the Duke of Normandy. Remember, the Normans are the descendants of Viking raiders who landed in France and became dukes. So William is a Norseman, but he's a French Norseman now. Well, he claims to have a right to the English crown, and that Harold, King Harold, has cheated him of this right. So also in 1066, later that year, right after King Harold has attacked and defeated the Norsemen, William the Norman invades. And King Harold has to turn around right away from defeating these Norsemen in this spectacular battle, sprint south, and he's going to have to go head to head with this fellow right here, William of Normandy. We're going to pick up this story in class. We've got a lot more on the battle that is to come. So I don't want to leave you in suspense, except I'm going to leave you in suspense. That's all we have for today. I'll see you in class.